does it feel when you suddenly lose a loved one, then another, and then another? First, her grandfather, who taught her so much about nature and life, suddenly had a heart attack and died the next morning. His death was sudden and negatively impacted her family structure and finances. A year later, she was an eyewitness of her brother's murder, who her sister-in-law's lover callously killed. She had the responsibility to notify her mom that her beloved son was murdered. What am I supposed to tell her? How can I spare my beloved mom from the details of this murder? Before she could grasp the shock of this senseless death, she was hit with another sudden death. Her mom couldn't cope with this murder and literally grieved herself to death. 6 months after her brother's murder, her precious mom, her rock, had a massive stroke and died within 8 hours. How does a 16-year-old handle these tragedies that rocked her world? She felt everyone that she loved died without saying goodbye. She had no closure and was haunted for years by these tragedies. Who does she turn to for help during these crises? Where was God? Did he abandon her too? The sudden grief was too much for her to handle. Jane M. Wells lost many loved ones to sudden deaths. Over the years, she faced more deaths with no skills to cope with her grief. Eventually, the grief became too much to handle. She became angry and withdrawn and felt alone and abandoned. Her health took a toll, and it looked like there was no bottom to the sadness and grief in her life. This memoir describes Jane Wells' experiences during a tumultuous period in her life when her grandfather, brother, and mother suddenly passed away while she was still young. It's Time, Take Your Message Everywhere highlights the emotional struggles she encountered. It took years before she learned how to deal with her grief. She kept her grief so bottled up inside of her that it eventually affected her health and other relationships. It's Time follows Jane's path to healing as she navigates her life as a heartbroken young mother dealing with grief. Her life demonstrates how a person can transition from the profound devastation of grief to a healthy way of grieving. There's hope for anyone traveling down the road of grief. You can now order your copy of It's Time by Jane Marie Wells from Amazon and other major platforms.